Shabbat Shalom. As we approach this week's Shabbat, we also approach the end of the book of Bereshit. The book of Bereshit is Genesis that we have started right after the festival of Sukkot, and we've finally concluded now nearly at the end of December. And the Torah reading for this weekend, Vayihi. And he lived. But I'd like to begin somewhere else in Masechet Avot, where it says, V'im ein bina ein da'at. V'im ein da'at ein bina. It's in the third chapter of Pirkei Avot. Where there is no knowledge, there is no comprehension. And where there is no comprehension, there is no knowledge. What does that mean? Well, that means that when we learn, there are two aspects to learning that are integral to incorporating them both into our body as a seamless whole. The first one is knowledge. What do? We learn. We read books. We listen to words of Torah. We participate in Torah discussions. We open up tomes of knowledge that we have not yet opened up. We learn what the Talmud is. We learn what the Torah is. We learn who Rashi was. We learn about Rambam, Maimonides. We learn about all the great sages who had something to contribute, not necessarily the biographies, but what they had to contribute to the understanding of what God wants from us. That's knowledge. Knowledge is good. Knowledge is wonderful. Knowledge is full of potential, which is how the second part comes into play, the potential. Once we've got that knowledge, what do we do with the knowledge? It's a question of integration of that knowledge into ourselves, which then transforms itself into action. How we then incorporate that knowledge into our lives. Knowledge for its own sake is great if you want to enter into arguments with people and win. But if you really want to change your life, if you really want to live a Jewish life that matters, what you do with that knowledge matters so much that that knowledge becomes realized, actualized by the way that we inform our lives, by the way that we interact with God, the way that we perform our own mitzvot in our own life, and the way that we interact with other people. So, and it works the other way around too. And so if we've got a sense of what it means to perform mitzvahs, right? We give tzedakah, we light our candles, we keep kosher, we do whatever mitzvahs we do, but we don't expand upon that knowledge. We're stuck in the knowledge that we have, and we never really open up new tomes, open up the Talmud, open up the Torah, open up the Tanakh, open up our mind to new concepts and new constructs. We will stay precisely as we are, like fossilized. So both are so critical to a life that matters. Constant learning and translating that knowledge into doing, and if we're doing, constantly learning to enhance what we know and then making that an active part of our existence. So how does that relate to our Torah reading this week? The Torah reading opens up with the words Vayihi Yaakov ba'aretz, and Yaakov, Jacob, lived in the land. And some great sages, Aryeh Leib, for example, one of them, the Alter Rebbe asked the question, why doesn't it say, and he lived in, and he was in the land? It doesn't need to say he lived in the land. It's obvious he was in the land. It doesn't need to say Vayichi. Why does the Torah say Vayichi, he lived in the land, instead of he just was in the land? And the answer that he supplies is something powerful. He says, we live in Galut. Whether we live in Australia, we live in Russia, we live in America, we live in Venezuela, that makes no difference. Wherever we live, we are living in exile. We are living amongst people who are not like ourselves. And so it is so easy to become like the surroundings in which we live. We take on the mode of talk, mode of dress, mode of eating, mode of behavior, and gradually, so gradually, takes generations, we slough off our background, our backdrop, our traditions that have been handed down throughout the generations that ultimately devolved upon us. I've spoken of this many times with you before, that you are the result of the transmission of a Jewish tradition that began at Mount Sinai and now has culminated in you. So in your hands lies the destiny of future generations that will go on for thousands of years more, or not. So here's the cusp of what the rabbi was talking about. He was talking about that Jacob remained faithful, living a fully Jewish life in a land that was not his own. In other words, he took to heart the words of Pirkei Avot. He continued to learn, and he continued to make that learning realized with his hands, with his feet, with his mouth, with his actions, with his thought, with everything that he did. This is my wish and my prayer for you as we begin this sacred Shabbat, that we take a vow that we'll grow Jewishly by learning. We'll pick up books, volumes, and tomes, and take opportunity, whenever opportunity presents itself, to learn about Judaism, Yiddishkeit, in ways that we do not know now, to realize that we are an empty vessel ready to be filled. And secondly, to make that knowledge become not just knowledge and potential, but knowledge ultimately realized by the actions that we perform. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a wonderful and peaceful, holy, new beginning of self and life.